If there's one thing that Staten Islanders take seriously, it's their food. But challenges in the dining industry have led to what feels like a revolving door of restaurants, with many local establishments closing their doors for good in recent years, but dozens of new ones popping up to take their place.
You have to understand that 100 restaurants in 3 years is actually not that much. It seems like a lot, but we have 1,040-something restaurants right now on Staten Island. And then
Wow, really?
Yeah, there's
I had no idea.
over 1,000 licensed restaurants on Staten Island, according to the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Now, in the grander scheme of things, with over 500,000 people here, we don't have enough restaurants.
Interesting.
Considering that volume, it's a small number, but it's shocking when they go out of business.
Welcome to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene, a podcast bringing you an inside look at the biggest stories on Staten Island with the reporters who cover them. I'm your host, Erik Bascome, and this week I'm joined by Staten Island Advance food editor Pam Silvestri to talk all things food and dining across the borough. Thanks for joining me today, Pam. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. And, it's been a long time since we've had you on the podcast. I think you were actually pretty early on. We were during the pandemic. We were talking about all of the different impacts on the local restaurants. There was no indoor dining. For a while, there wasn't even the outdoor dining. And so it was just takeout only. And it was really a mess the first time that we had you on here. And so I'm sure that you and all the local restaurateurs on Staten Island are glad that things are pretty much back to normal now, right?
Almost back to normal. Almost there. A lot of struggles and still supply chain issues. So, the cost of goods is very high right now. Gas prices are up. That affects the price not only for the restaurant owner to purchase, but also for the patron to come in and dine.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we've been seeing, I think, across all industries and sectors. And like even in my own work doing transportation and stuff, it's like, okay, the pandemic is kind of calmed down a bit and the coronavirus rates aren't out of control like they were. People aren't wearing masks. People aren't afraid to go outside. But the lingering impacts of that pandemic and the way that they've affected, mass transit ridership for things that, I cover, or, gas prices, like you were saying, price of resources and materials. And so pretty much everyone is still affected, even though the world feels a little more normal. It's really not what it once was. So it is interesting to see kind of the ripple effects and how that has kind of played out over the past few years. But at least we can go back and sit in a restaurant now and have dinner. So at least I think that's a step in the right direction for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a multifaceted podcast. So we're going to talk some restaurant stuff. We're going to talk some summer dining stuff. We might even mix in some pizza because we know Staten Islanders, how passionate they are about their pizza there. But I really wanted to start with the restaurant scene because this is something that is impacting so many different people. We've seen so many restaurants close in recent years. A lot of people's favorites, I'm sure, places that they've been going for years or even decades in some cases that are just no longer there, which is really sad. And at the same time, we have things popping up that are new that people like to go check out and might find their new favorite spot. So I wanted to dig into all that. I know that you are really the perfect person for this because this is, a full-time job for you, right? You are Staten Island food in some ways. And so I wanted to talk first about the closures. And I was curious, in your mind, what are some ones that stand out to you over the past couple of years? Maybe we can go back to like since the pandemic first started or whatever you think. But what are the big ones that we've kind of lost? Can you talk a little bit about those?
Well, I think stunning was Nürnberger Beer House. That was one of the few German restaurants on Staten Island and one of the few left in New York City. The fact that they, suddenly announced their closure was a huge deal. People came from all over for that final night, which was an impressive thing to be at. But at the same time, it was a big loss on Castleton Avenue, which it was starting to become a food district because one of the first sit-down Haitian restaurants popped up there at Delmas 48 over there in West Brighton. You also have, Clay and Kiln, which does pottery, and people can bring wine and cheese in on their own. Their sushi went over there. The old Dick's Deli is now going to actually be farm to bagel. It's a farm to table concept that's coming up over there. So in the midst of that closure, you have such a vibrant restaurant scene going on around it, which is a shame that went out in the middle of it. Also, I think Juicy Lucy barbecue place at 809 Father Capitano Boulevard, that was a huge loss. It was an award-winning barbecue concept that was down there by the beach. That was a very sad thing to see go. The owner, Richie Holmes, also closed Juicy Lucia, a concept that was merging the pizza of DeFara Pizzeria, which is a famous place in Brooklyn, that was in Grant City. With that closure comes the opening of Metropolis, which is a new restaurant concept by Richie, and that is a steakhouse, which is doing fairly well.
The first one you hit on was the one that I think really impacted me the most, which is Nürnberger. That is a place that I've been going with friends and family for years now. I had friends who used to work there when they were in high school or college, summer jobs. They would be back in the beer garden in the yard working the grill or, waiting tables or whatever it might be. And they had the restaurant on one side, they had the beer hall on the other side. They would have live music in there and all these great German beers that you really aren't finding on tap at most other places on Staten Island. The food was just incredible. I missed that potato leek soup. That was my go-to. And then they had I don't remember what they called them exactly, but they were almost like German hot plates, and they had the potatoes and bacon and onions on the skillet with whatever sausage you wanted over the top. And that's something that you're really not finding in other places on Staten Island, and so that was a really unique and special place for me and my friends. And so I know that one really hit hard. And then I also just wanted to mention Beer Garden, which is kind of right up the block from me. So that was our local spot for sort of a football Sunday, right? You go there, you get a couple beers, you get some wings, and you just sit around and you can watch all day. They used to do specials or it's like, $30 all you can drink for the 1:00 games or something like that. So it was really not only a restaurant, but also in some ways like a big community there, because it was just as much of a bar as it was a restaurant. And, they had the same patrons and the bartenders knew who you were and they knew what you were going to order. And I think that those are some of the little things about restaurant closures that sometimes go unnoticed. It's like, okay, you can't go there because you to get a meal, but it's also you miss those people. You miss being around those people, being in that environment. I think that is something that a lot of people are experiencing for a bunch of different places right now. But I know you had this article kind of looking at what are the biggest reasons why these restaurants are failing. I think you said in the article that we've lost more than 100 restaurants in the past 3 years, which just feels like an astronomical number when you really sit and think about it. So I'm curious, when you were working on that, when you were talking to different people in the industry, what was kind of your takeaway? What are the biggest things that are kind of driving these places out of business right now?
Well, I think, you have to understand that the stretch of time where there was no indoor dining really took a toll on the restaurant industry. It's unfortunate that the lawmakers weren't able to change that. I would like to say that 100 restaurants in 3 years is actually not that much. It seems like a lot, but we have 1,040-something restaurants right now on Staten Island. And
wow, really?
Yeah, there's 1,000,
no idea.
Over 1,000 licensed restaurants on Staten Island, according to the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Now, in the grander scheme of things, with over 500,000 people here, we don't have enough restaurants.
Interesting.
So and considering that volume, it's a small number, but it's shocking when they go out of business. I mean, for instance, just the loss of something like a Schaefer's Tavern. It goes on for so many years, you almost take it for granted. It's in the neighborhood, and then suddenly it's gone. But that wasn't a result of COVID. I think a significant loss, actually, during COVID was a small ice cream shop. It was a Baskin-Robbins that had been established in the early 70s, and it was the last freestanding Baskin-Robbins on Staten Island. Now they're merged with Dunkin' Donuts and other fast food concepts. But the woman who owned this place, Susan Yuan, had run it for a couple of decades, and people really relied on it, between all the schools in the area coming in for ice cream, and also occasion cakes and things like that. People really used it as a resource, and she was sort of a familiar face in the community in that respect. But that is a perfect example of a business that was really impacted by the school closures, and at the same time, no celebrations, and big gatherings. So, and on another note, too, you have to look at the great things about new restaurants, the things that they're doing that these places that have failed haven't done. Okay, so when they fail, the biggest problem is that they put too much money into things like signage, a big neon sign. All their money went into things early on instead of, saving money to carry payroll over time. A lot of the newer places, too, focused on one particular concept. And as a result, when prices went wild on specific commodities like beef or chicken, those restaurants that focused on a very specific thing were impacted greatly, and they really couldn't shuffle and lower the food cost. Also, the minimum wage went up. This really hurt restaurants quite a bit. It's very hard to carry payroll taxes and things like that. And then I think that the greatest problem with restaurants failing, and why they fail, is because they just don't have the knowledge of the food industry to begin with, and they really don't have any business in being in the food business. Mm-hmm. So it's like being a surgeon and you never really went to medical school, And the food business is a very complicated one. It's, it relies on knowledge of health issues. You can get people very ill if you don't know what you're doing. If you don't know how to properly handle food, you can cross-contaminate it or, create a situation where, and I just wrote a story actually about the proper food handling of things in hot weather. And like something simple as taking a soup in a big vat and cooling it down quickly in a big bucket of ice is very important, because if you don't cool something down like that quickly, you can get a botulism condition where there are pockets of hot liquid in there, and that creates a situation where it puts food in the temperature danger zone and creates a lot of germs and bacteria. So you have to be very knowledgeable, and those people who aren't knowledgeable are very much weeded out quickly. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And there really are, like you mentioned, so many different contributing factors to this. I think that the pricing is a big one, and you've noticed it even in the restaurants that have survived. You're seeing pretty significant increases in pricing there, and it's kind of, again, something that we're seeing across many industries and many sectors, and it comes down to the fact that they're like, hey, I'm paying more for this, so you need to pay more for this. I have to pass the costs along in some way, otherwise I'm operating at a deficit. And so that's definitely something that has impacted people. And before we move on, I do want to just mention that Baskin Robbins also a big loss for me personally. That is, you're talking about the one on Victory Boulevard, right over by Joe and Pat's and near Manor Road. That's also right near my house. And throughout the years, that was a place that we would go for our birthday cakes, or me and my friends in the summer would go there and get a milkshake, and we would do things like that. And so that was another one that we were definitely very sad to see go. We'll be right back. The Mayor of Maple Avenue is a powerful multi-part podcast about Sean Sinisi, a victim of former Penn State football coach Jerry Sandusky, who was arrested 10 years ago for numerous child sexual abuse charges. The podcast series is written and hosted by Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Sarah Ganim, who takes listeners into the world of addiction rehabilitation, where society can be quick to celebrate the consequences for abusers while not addressing the needs of their victims. Subscribe now to The Mayor of Maple Avenue wherever you get your podcasts. But so let's move on a little bit now to some of the new restaurants that are opening. And can you tell me kind of some of the big places that have popped up recently that the Staten Islanders who may not be following your reporting as much, like they may not have heard of it yet? What are some places that you think that they should check out?
Well, Staten Island is blossoming in various communities, particularly the Palestinian community. The Asian community is coming in full force, especially around the supermarket HL, which is in Newdorp in the former Shalimar, and also, the Campatella's place. We are seeing not only an influx of different ethnicities coming in, but also the food is reflecting that. So there are places that I don't think that people would necessarily have on their radar, or they don't, they can't pronounce the name or whatever, and so they wouldn't necessarily go in there. But these are great places. I'm going to just point to Ayat, which is a Palestinian restaurant that's in Dongan Hills. That place is extraordinary. And also there's a new restaurant which is reflective of the pizza on Staten Island, and that's Pienza, and that's actually open at Commons 3, which is where the Advance is located. Pienza is a really marvelous, necessary thing in the corporate park that Minnecoach has established on South Avenue because it adds another food option where you don't have to leave the community. I think that is a significant restaurant on the horizon here. Also, Mellow Bistro, which is on Bay Street, which took the place of Bin 5, is extraordinary. And the owner there, whose last name is Mello, Mello, is doing a fabulous job. One other restaurant which really should get the attention of publications outside of the Staten Island Advance is 286 South, which is the former conglomeration of Waterside Bar and Grill, which was over on Ellis Street. They've moved their operation over to 286 Richmond Valley Road, which is in Richmond Valley. That place is just extraordinary. I can't say that the decor is grabbing, but it's a lot of like an industrial gray chic. But the food is wonderful, and they have things that you really don't see on Staten Island. Various wild mushrooms, or a collection of different kinds of mushrooms. A pork chop that's like the size of my forearm. That's a tomahawk. And then the chef there is doing great things. So, and they're doing a fine job there.
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head early on there with the fact that we are seeing such an influx of different communities and different cultures and different types of food popping up. And just one that kind of comes to mind for me is that now we have over on Forest Avenue near Richmond Avenue, the Korean barbecue and hot pot location, which is something that I've always heard about and I've always wanted to try, but they were all either in Manhattan or in Brooklyn, or I didn't really have the opportunity, or they're super expensive. You didn't take in the whole trip out there. You got to take the ferry. We know how the ferry runs these days. So I had never really gone to any of those before. And then when it opened up, me and some of my fellow coworkers actually went over there and tried the food. And it was just as incredible as I thought it was going to be. And I just loved the whole concept, and having the food cooked in front of you and having so many different options. You pay a flat rate, and then you can just kind of whatever you want, they'll just bring over to you. And that was something that was really cool. I'd never had the opportunity to try it before, and now we do. On Staten Island. And so I think that that's something that people should really look out for, is just checking out the places where it's like, oh, I've never tried that before. Instead of thinking, oh, I've never tried that before, I probably wouldn't like it, say, oh, I might really like that. I should go check it out. And that's something that, we have so many more opportunities for now on Staten Island than we did in the past. So we've talked a lot about the restaurant so far. I want to talk about some of kind of the food events going on Staten Island. So I know just last month we had the food truck festival at Mount Loretto, which is usually a big hit. I didn't get the chance to make it out this year. I've gone in the past. I've covered it for the Advance. I've also just gone there to eat food because why not, right? And so I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about kind of how that went, and if there's anything else kind of coming up that Staten Islanders should be on the lookout for.
Well, food trucks, once you get them in one central place and you have a band or a set of bands and a bunch of Staten Islanders that reconnect over food, you have yourself a great festival. And Anthony Rapichulo always organizes a great festival there at Mount Loretto. It's a great event. And they have it a couple of times a year, that one, and also in the fall. Hopefully Historic Richmond Town can get it together with the food a little bit better at the Richmond County Fair, which is, around Labor Day, on Labor Day. They really have a lot of potential there. Maybe they can, blow it out a little bit more with the craft beer and things like that. There's also Pig Island, which is a barbecue event that happens at Snug Harbor. Fabulous. The Polish Festival, which was just on Father's Day. Unbelievable. It's an event organized by St. Stanislaus Kostka Roman Catholic Church, which is on York Avenue in New Brighton. They do a phenomenal job with that. And they have all sorts of interesting things at the Polish Festival, which I find exciting. They do a lot of the food in the basement of the church, but they also get their pierogi from one of the only pierogi factories in New York City, which is on Staten Island, and it's in Mariners Harbor.
Oh, wow.
L&B, which is Luke and Bart. It's a husband and wife that turn out thousands and thousands of hand-formed pierogi from their little place down near Mesereau Street in Mariners Harbor. It's a great place. You can go in and get a buffet of food that is from a hot table and tons of pierogi, including around this time of the year, they have the sweet ones, which are filled with strawberry or blueberry, and you can...
Oh, wow. I didn't even know that was an option.
Oh, yeah. And you can serve it with a little dollop of sour cream. Yeah, good stuff. But, if we had a really wonderful food festival that was organized by the district attorney's office. Mike McMahon did a wonderful food festival, and I hope he does this annually. It was an international food festival. It highlighted the Sri Lankan food on Staten Island, which is extraordinary. We do have a handful of places, including a place called Lakrowana, which has captured the attention of other publications who should be unnamed, who come into our island and cover food. But Lakrowana has received enormous acclaim. They have an all-you-can-eat buffet for about $15 a head on the weekends. So Saturday and Sunday, you can go and eat your heart out and try things that you've never had before, including mulligatawny soup. But also in that mix of international food, it highlighted Pakistani food. There's a place called Al Hamza, which is a restaurant that serves halal food and it appeals to the Pakistani community, and that's in Concord on Tarjee Street. And the other thing that it highlighted, you saw just from Sacred Heart and the pastor that was newly installed there, Father Ray, He has a marvelous understanding of the Filipino community, being Filipino himself. And so he's brought about, a lot of awareness of Filipino food on Staten Island. And one of my favorite places actually is, I think, should be in the limelight more. Maybe Father Ray will join me there at this place, but it's Philam Cucina, which is on Tompkins Avenue in Rosebank. Excellent restaurant. And they have something called a kamayan, which is a thing where you eat with your hands and they roll out a banana leaf in the middle of the table and all the food is portioned out in the middle of the table and you get, 6 or 8 of your best friends and you sit and you eat with your hands. It's a great exercise to do, especially after COVID. So again, food festivals highlight the diversity of the borough, the exquisiteness of the food here. A lot of the stuff is, like homemade food that you can go around Staten Island and eat everything around the world and never leave the borough. It's really incredible. And then you could start actually with a couple of different places. And I've done this actually on a Facebook Live where I went around the island and went to different restaurants. You could go to Yemen Cafe, which is a Yemeni restaurant that's in Dongan Hills. I believe it's 1819 Highland Boulevard. It's right across from a health food restaurant called Taste Buds. And that place is fabulous. They make a slow-cooked lamb dish that is absolutely tender, falling off the bone, excellent lamb shank, lots of, great rice. And there's a woman there that's an expert in making bread that it's like a giant pita. Absolutely excellent. One of them is studded with sesame seeds, fabulous. And then, you can make your way over to kind of the Middle East. There's a great place called Lebanese Eatery in Port Richmond. It's right next to a place called Basil Cucina, which is like kind of a salady place. And then also we have great, vibrant Mexican food on Staten Island. You don't just have to go down to Port Richmond Avenue. You can just kind of walk around West Brighton. There's some great places. There's a place called Jaquilta, which only on Staten Island can you have a laundromat, a deli, and a grocery store all in one.
Oh, wow.
And it's got great, tacos and slow rotisserie chicken. That's on Broadway in West Brighton near Cary Avenue. And then also Oaxaca Deli highlights the food of Oaxaca in Mexico and also has Mexican pizza, which entails getting pizza and putting, Mexican ingredients on there like chipotle and avocado and things like that. And then I just want to highlight one other really good Mexican place. It's called Blue Azul. It's a taco place in Great Kills. Forgive me, but it's on the tip of my tongue. And
La Iguana?
La Iguana Azul. There you go. You're so good with your restaurant. You know them better. So yeah, that place is great.
Yeah, no, and I hope our listeners are taking notes right now because you have just given me personally so many different places to check out that I cannot wait to really make my way around the borough. And so we've talked a lot about restaurants. We've talked about some of the food events. I figured since we have you on right in the middle of summer, we could also talk about some kind of summer food topics, whether it's things like
outdoor dining.
We've got outdoor dining, which is an incredible thing. We've got people doing their summer barbecues, right? We just had the 4th of July recently, but we'll still have Labor Day. People grill every weekend over the summer, or at least I do. So I was wondering if you had any tips for Staten Islanders to kind of spice up their barbecues, right? Everybody has the usual. You put some burgers, some hot dogs, maybe some chicken on the grill. But like, what are some things, as a food expert that people might not think of that you could add to your barbecue to really impress your guests next time around?
Well, I think you could take advantage of some of the newer restaurants and some of the kind of more unusual ones on the island to supplement your burgers and dogs. And I'm thinking just off the top of my head is Zara, which is a new restaurant. It's a Turkish restaurant that is it's where the old Perkins was.
Yes, in Forest.
Excellent restaurant. And they, you can get kebabs and things like that and have them cook it or get them raw and throw them on the grill. The owner of that restaurant actually has a Turkish market that opened up in Dongan Hills, which is a fine place. And, like Byers Market,
I love Byers.
In Willowbrook is just
that's my go-to.
It's such a great store. They have a very nice deli department. They make all of their salads from scratch. They do hundreds and hundreds of pounds of coleslaw and macaroni salad.
Best potato salad on the island, in my opinion. I don't like to use best. I'll say my favorite potato salad on the island. Anytime I'm going to a friend's barbecue, I'm like, don't worry, I'll bring the salads because I will not eat any other ones that they have. So shout out to Byers. I've been going there my whole life.
Yeah.
Since it switched over. It used to be a Miggy's, right?
Yes.
Yeah. But sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I just had to give the Byers shout out. They are incredible.
I love your enthusiasm. So that's great. Yeah, Byers does a great job. And also, Staten Island has some wonderful bakeries. So I would suggest very strongly, to go all carved out and go to some of the really great bakeries on the island, one of which is very new. It's coffee and collectibles, and it's the owners of Cake Chef. They do the pastries and things like that, not so much bread. But then there's a La Dolce, which is out in Pleasant Plains. They do a marvelous job with bread. And, instead of putting your burgers and dogs or your, whatever chops and things like that, you could, instead of just serving it with like a Martin's potato roll, you can always dress it up with great Italian bread or ciabatta or fennel raisin bread, that kind of thing, which you can get readily at, like I said, La Dolce, or bagels. I mean, I hate to, think of throwing bagels on the grill, but Heartland Bagels, believe it or not, they have such great sweets. Mark's Bake Shop also does a fine job. Mark's Bake Shop is interesting because if you remember the old Andrew and Ellen's Bakery, Mark's Bake Shop does those recipes. So they're very familiar, German-based recipes. That's a great bake shop.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the other thing about summer that we see all the time is that people are traveling more than they would in other times of the year, right? So they're going on trips to places that they may have never visited before. So as a restaurant expert that you are, when you're away from home, what is something that you look for when you are deciding which restaurant to eat at, right? Because there have been so many instances, for me at least, where I'll go somewhere and it's like, okay, well, where should we go for dinner tonight? And you look up, what are the best restaurants in whatever town you're visiting? And there's a list of 30 things. Like, what do you recommend people kind of look for? What stands out to you when you're away and you're trying to pick where you want to eat?
Well, that's interesting because I eat out so much that when I go away, I find it a great joy to just stay in the kitchen and play Iron Chef with in the cabinet and whatever's at a farm stand nearby.
Yeah.
And also to supplement anything with like a local ice cream parlor. So just recently I went to Seaside Park in New Jersey, and I was surprised. My children gravitated to a restaurant that really could have been a Staten Island restaurant. The one night that we ate out, we ate at a restaurant called Ebby's, which was like being in Eltingville, but they loved it. And but right across the street is a place called Bum Rogers, which I know is very popular with Staten Islanders. It's all seafood. And, when you're at the shore, you've got to think seafood and, whatever's going on in the ocean is the thing that you want on your plate. So
no, that's a good point. Me and my family go up to Maine all the time. We're going up later this summer, actually. And my mom, every meal is lobster. If she can find a way to eat lobster for every meal, she will do it while we're up there. So I think that's a good thing for a lot of people, is to just look for the regional food, right? The regional specialty where you are. But, you mentioned that, you like to make food yourself when you're on vacation. So for someone who is away and they're at their vacation rental or their Airbnb, what are some kind of tips for them if you're cooking away from the house? Obviously, you don't have everything you would usually have at your home kitchen. So what are some tips for people who are cooking away from home?
That's an interesting question. I would suggest, first of all, having your groceries delivered to the place that you're going, if you can do it, like call Instacart or Costco.com or something like that, and try to get as much possible in the location, your Bisquick or your larger items, paper towels, things like that. And then, supplementing with local farm stands is always great. You can pick things up here and there, but you don't want to be going to the supermarket every night. So to stock a pantry with some really basic things. I did do a story on this recently, and somebody brought up a really great point. It was a woman named Jody Hall, who owns an interior decorating place called Gables Interiors on Newdorp Lane. She had mentioned sticking with breakfast items. Like you just get eggs, butter, sliced bread, cheese, things like that. And if you start with the basic of breakfast, you can build out any meal. And she's right. You can do quiches, you can do casseroles, you can make breakfast, with bacon and things like that. So
that's interesting. I hadn't considered that. Maybe I'll take some of those tips, because I'm going away this weekend too, just up to a lake house with some friends. And so, especially if you're going to like a lake house or something, we're in the middle of nowhere, so we're not really going out to the local restaurants. We're going to be cooking in the house. So maybe I'll give some of those suggestions to them. So I think you mentioned this one earlier, but this was a recent article you did that kind of interested me, and also kind of the fact that we're in summer, just what it's like working in a kitchen during the summer and the heat. Obviously, we've been seeing the heat has been worse than it has in years, really, here. I mean, I think today it's supposed to be 95 degrees as we're recording this. And so I know personally, when I was in college and I was home for the summers, I used to work in a pizzeria around the corner from me, and standing next to that oven every time you opened it was just absolutely brutal. Like I felt like I was getting burned like at the beach, essentially. And so I imagine that for a lot of people in the restaurant industry, that this is something that they struggle with around this time of year. So If you could just tell us a little bit about like what it's like having to work in a kitchen during the summer and what those people try and do to stay cool.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. And I'm going to preface this by saying that if you don't have any pain, you won't appreciate being pain-free eventually. So it's a great topic to write about for me because I spent a lot of uncomfortable times in my restaurant in American Grill when it was on Forest Avenue. Our chef could not tolerate the heat, and he used to go down like a red oak. When the temperature went over 100, he would be like completely passed out. And I'd have one of the guys in the kitchen named Cirillo would, be the one to kind of fetch me in the front of the restaurant, be like, Patrona, blah, 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 the chef is on the floor, It's just like, oh my gosh. So anyway, we'd go back and we'd have to fortify him with all sorts of Gatorade and whatever else before that. We learned very quickly that we had to do that. But working in the restaurant and writing about the restaurant industry in the heat, for instance, today I was at Kilmeyer's Old Bavaria Inn. We were in the beer garden and it was impossibly hot and the food was melting in front of me, and you just try not to think about it. But anyway, but it's all good in the end because, I do remember the most uncomfortable time ever in my industry days was working in the Hillside Swim Club snack bar, which we did for 2 years. Oh my gosh. So the place is painted a dark color, which attracts even more heat.
Of course.
And I remember working the grill and putting clams and, wine and garlic in these little sealed containers, and it was dreadfully hot, and it was a heat wave. And so they were like, hey, the pool's going to be open for another 2 hours. I was like, oh,
great.
Gosh, no more. Anyway, but it was 10 o'clock at night, and the staff at the time, the help wasn't allowed to use the pool. But the pool manager, I said to him, look, at the end, do you think I could just go in the pool? Yeah. He's like, sure. So I just literally walked off the dining board with my clothes on, and I just went and I sat at the bottom of the pool, and it felt good. So.
Yeah, no, I can only imagine, especially in like a concession stand like that. That sounds brutal.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, before we go, you had an article recently about this list of the best pizzerias in the United States, and I saw that there were a couple of New York City pizzerias referenced in there, but none of them on Staten Island, which I know will upset a lot of people probably listening to this. Pizza is something that, is very near and dear to our hearts here. And I debate all the time with fellow coworkers about what is the best pizza on Staten Island, or what's your top 3, or what's your top 5. So given your expertise in the field, I wanted to ask you before we go, just for a list kind of some of your favorite pizza places on Staten Island.
That's a horrifying question, and there's no...
I know, don't make anyone mad.
Right answer to that one. But I will say, over the years, especially when Steve LaCastri was making the pizza and the dough, I particularly enjoyed Dough by LaCastri, which has 2 locations. One's in Eltingville, the other one's from a small shack in Dongan Hills. I do love their Hotter Than July, ironically, pie, which is really excellent. And that dough can never be the same as when Steve was doing it, but still it's excellent. I do enjoy round pie.
Me too. So good.
They have like a proprietary thing that they do, which I believe is like panko breadcrumb.
On the crust underneath, right?
It's like little ball bearings.
I've been trying to figure out what that is. Someone said like cornmeal, maybe panko, something like that. But it gives it a crunch that is just unlike any other pizza that I've really had. And that is definitely up there for me as well. We always say that it's funny because they are relatively new, but they have like skyrocketed up my rankings of pizzerias on Staten Island. And they have so many good specialty slices too. I know a lot of people are like, I want a traditional pizza slice, but every now and then I will do a buffalo chicken slice. I'll do a vodka slice. They have a great barbecue slice. They have, salad slices, things like that. So that is definitely a good one that has surprised me recently and is right around the corner. So I probably eat it more than I should.
I'm not going to throw shade on restaurants outside of Staten Island, and I'm not going to elevate the pizzerias that were on the list from outside the borough. But I will say, one of the places that really does stand out and could make the borough particularly proud and be on those lists of really top pies is on New Dorp Lane. And I'm just going to throw it out there. Do you know the name of the restaurant?
I do not. This one's...
Giove?
Oh, I have not been... Wait, no, we went there for an Advance event once, right? Yes, like a couple of years ago. That was
fabulous.
Really yeah. No, it's been a while. I'm not really on that part of the island too often, so I haven't had the chance. But I do remember we went there. This was a while ago at this point, pre-pandemic for sure. Maybe 2019 or early 2020, but that is a good one. They
make a beautiful pie with speck, which is like a form of cured, prosciutto ham. You got to come out there more with me with these Facebook Lives, because I'd like to introduce you to a couple of really great pizzerias. And but again, I don't know if we could ever be in the top 10 pizzerias, because Staten Islanders are used to the same old, like if you change a recipe at Danino, if you don't use sausage crumbles at, in your favorite parlor, Lee's pie, if they change it,
if that clam pie changes, I think that people will riot. Truly, yes. There will be protests outside of Lee's if they ever change that clam pie, because that is a staple for so many people.
Absolutely. So consistency is the thing that keeps us from getting in the top rankings of pizza.
Interesting, and that's something I hadn't really considered. But regardless of where we rank on those lists, I know where Staten Island pizza ranks in my heart, and that's what really matters. So thank you so much for joining me today, Pam. This was a blast. I would love to have you back on again soon to talk more food.
Thank you, and now I'm officially hungry.
Yes, me too. Well, it's lunchtime, so that's great. Thank you for listening to the Staten Island Advances from the Scene. If you like what you've heard, please make sure to rate and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and visit silive.com for the latest on all these stories and more. Thank you for supporting local journalism.